Okay, so it's 11:15 in East Coast and 6:15 in Israel. We'll get started. What we're going to do before we start, I'm going to share with you something that relates to the shir and all the terrible news from today. But there was this article in the paper this week called "A Voice from the Past." I'm going to share it with you. There we go. Um, Hope you see my screen. It's the article's in Hebrew, but I think there's probably an English version somewhere. They found a what's called a bule, like a ring that someone wore that they signed their name with, where the writing is backwards. Where it's like a thing you would sign a clay seal with when you would send an important letter. But they found it in the city of David in the excavations, in the southern excavations, like outside the Kotel by the southern wall. And everyone see the picture of it? Hope you see it. That's the size of it. But it fits on a ring on a finger, or you can wear it around your neck. But you use it, and when you put it on a clay thing and it dries, you have your signature there. But it's a cute little picture of like a guy with a fancy robe with wings, more of like an Assyrian type. But when you read the Hebrew letters, that's ancient Hebrew from Beit Rishon. When you read it in its mirror message, the name is Yoezer ben Hoshiel. See the name? Yoezer ben Hoshiel. And the question is, now they found it from the time of the destruction of the first temple, pretty much, like 6th century BCE, like pretty much the time. There's a lot of artifacts they found when people were running away from the city, when the city was destroyed and everything filled up. But there's a lot of finds there from the end of the first temple period, and this from that time period. And the question is he mentioned in Tanakh? Anyone know where? You have no idea. It's okay. So the closest match, now Yehoezer means Yeho in front of it, that's God, means this is someone who God's going to help or helps God, or God should help him. Hoshiel also, his father's name, Ho is God's name. Like either Hey Vav in the beginning of a name, or Yud Hey Vav, or Yud Hey at the end of a name. Here's Hashem should Moshiach. Hoshiyahu, Hashem should give us salvation. Yehoezer, God should help us. So it's a nice father-son name. So in the story, I'll share my screen now with I'll share my screen. Open up the book of Yirmiyahu. Where are we? I should have Yirmiyahu
Why
here
do
somewhere.
they think the wings are Assyrian? Where,
It's a very style. It's a Syrian style, like the
where do you see it?
in the article.
More Egyptian style.
No, the archaeologist who discovered it compared it to pictures on different reliefs of walls and things like that, like the Lachish wall and things like that. It's very typical in Assyrian art and Syrian sign things like that. But it's more Assyrian than Jewish. But it's what they claim was it was someone else's amulet, and he signed his name. He added his name later. Like he didn't make that. He used someone else's and added his name to it. But that's less important. The main thing is the name here. So in Yirmiyahu chapter 43, you know the story of Gedaliah ben Sub Gedaliah? After the Churban of Beit Rishon, and there's a small group of people left. So we'll talk about the background, but here's the person. Yomer Azariah ben Hoshayahu v'Yochanan ben Kirach. Got it? Yochanan ben Kirach, that's the guy who saved after Gedaliah was assassinated by Yishmael ben Netanya. Yochanan ben Kirach got the men together and attacked Yishmael ben Netanya and saved the coup d'etat there. And then he leads the people back to Egypt. But his sidekick here is Azariah ben Hoshiel. Now, Hoshaya, that's the exact same last name, isn't it? The Chobet said Yoezer. Now, Azariah and Yoezer is the same name, isn't it? Remember, there's in Megillat Esther, Ima Gola Shoglata, Im Yechonia Melech Yehuda. Now, what was his name? Was his name Yechonia or Yehoiachin? Who remembers? Of Galut Yehoiachin. We call it Galut Yehoiachin and Galut Yechonia. Yechonia and Yehoiachin is the same name. Do you put God's name in the beginning of the name or the end of the name? You understand? Yehoiachin or Yechonia or Yechonyahu. But it's the same. Whenever you have God's name in a name, you can put it, there's Yoachaz and Achaziel. two famous names of kings that come up quite often in Sefer Malachim. So the Ketubot says Yehoezer ben Hosheyahu, and here's Azariah. Is it the same guy? I don't know, but he's definitely somebody important. Why? Because he and Menachem ben Kerech. Now, who are these people? Real quick. If you remember Yochanan ben Kerech, let's just go back real quick to Yirmiyahu chapter 40. Where are we? Chapter 40 or 41. Yeah. Yishmael ben Netanya. I'm sorry, back to chapter 40. When the city is destroyed, here, and what do you call it? What happened? The Gedaliah ben Achikam was put in charge of was in charge of what's called Sherit HaPleitah, those who remained, in who the Babylonians didn't exile. They had to leave Yerushalayim, but Gedaliah ben Achikam was in charge. The Achikam family, ben Shaphan, was a pro-Babylonian, and therefore they appointed Gedaliah, Shaphan's grandson, to be in charge, and he was in charge of Mitzvah. And who came to join him? Vayishmu kol sarei hachayalim asher basadeh him avanshem kifkid melech Bavel Gedaliah ben Achikam ba'aretz. What do we see? A lot of people ran away from the city before the Babylonians took over. Who? The big shots in the army deserted the troops, the revolt, which was pointless. They left, they ran away to the fields during the destruction. When destruction was over and the Babylonians left and put Gedaliah in charge, they come out of the from hiding and go to Gedaliah, and they go and join him there. And in the group who goes there, who comes to Gedaliah, some of these Sarei Chayalim is Yishmael ben Netanya and Yochanan ben Kareach, and Saraya and a whole group of other people. But these are important people in the army who ran away from the city, so it makes sense they might have dropped something on the way out of the city. So Gedaliah told them to stay, and then v'gam kol haYehudim asher b'Moav v'nei Ammon v'Edom asher b'chol ha'aretzot shamu ki natan melech Bavel shirit Yehuda. A lot of people ran away before the Babylonians came over because they listened to Yirmiyahu. They ran away. Now the coast is clear. They come back, not to Jerusalem because Jerusalem's off limits now, but they go back to Gedaliah in the Mitzvah. So the Jews come back from all the places they were. It's almost like a Shivat Zion, like a return to Israel kind of thing. They come to Gedaliah, and Yochanan ben Kareach is head of the soldiers there. He's in the field. They come to Gedaliah, and then they tell him, there's this guy, Yishmael ben Netanya, he's working with the king of Jordan, Melech ben Ammon, to assassinate you, to put an end to all this. And there's a question, do you accept Lashon Hara or not? Basically, everyone knows the story, hopefully. Yishmael ben Netanya assassinates Gedaliah on Rosh Hashanah, and they put the bodies in that big pit we talked about way back. And then it's really bad. And then all the Sarei Chayalim with Yochanan ben Kareach, okay, and another guy, Yosef ben Hosheyahu, probably his brother, another son of Hosheyahu, okay, all the people, and they tell Yirmiyahu, okay, pray to God, what should we do? Right? And Hashem should tell us what we should do, the way we should go, and anything you say, we're going to do. Yirmiyahu says, I heard. He goes to God. For some reason, God doesn't answer him for 10 days. And when Yirmiyahu gives him the answer and tells him, stay in the land and everything will be fine and I'll protect you, they don't like his answer. And here's the big answer in 43. Okay? When Yirmiyahu told the people to stay in Israel, God will protect you. And don't worry about the Babylonians. He'll stand up with them instead, and don't go to Egypt. Right? So Azariah ben Hosheyahu, our guy we had that stamp from, and Yochanan ben Kareach, and all the people with him, they tell Yirmiyahu, Sheker ata medaber. They don't believe his nevuah. They call Yirmiyahu the Navi Sheker. Okay? Say, God didn't send you, okay? Because we don't believe it's right that God would tell us don't go down to Egypt. Who's misleading you? Baruch ben Neri is being paid by the Babylonians, right? To make you stay in the land so the Babylonians will come and finish us off. Got it? And Yochanan ben Kareach and all of his men didn't listen to God's words with Yirmiyahu. They followed God, but they didn't accept Yirmiyahu as a Navi. Anyway, that was the classic example of Sinat Chinam at the end of Bayit Rishon as well, not just Bayit Sheni. And everyone knows what happens. They went down to Egypt. Nothing's left of them. And the future of Israel is from the exile in Bavel. But the reason for the fast day of Tzum Gedaliah wasn't just because Gedaliah was assassinated, but it was the end of what's called Sherit HaPleitah. There was a chance for at least a small remnant to stay in Israel, and everything fell apart because they don't listen to Yirmiyahu, and they accuse Abraham of being an Navi Sheker, and they end up going to Egypt. And they're afraid because they don't trust, everyone's not trusting each other. It's all the Jews, when with all the fighting, it wasn't bad enough before the Babylonians came in. Even after destruction happens, they still keep on fighting and playing the blame game. Who's to blame for what went wrong? And that leads to the end of Beit Rishon. Anyway, so the article was said here, what was called, let's go back to the article. Zoom and sorry, here we go. I just want to bring that down because the article was called A Voice from the Past. And they brought it was nice, like we found something, it was right after Tisha B'Av. So we found remnants in Jerusalem from the time of the destruction, so it's called like A Voice from the Past. But I think it's best that if it's from the story of Tum Gedaliah, I think it's a really important message from nowadays. But no one brought it from that point of view. They just brought it, they found something really neat in Yerushalayim. So that was my little introduction to today's class. Not the topic, but I want to share that with you to help deal with the news from today. Anyway, let's start our class now today. Today's our last class let me put the source sheet up here. This is class number 51, according to my count. It might be class 50, according to the official count, but we'll argue with the website later on. But class 51, I want to summarize this fight against idol worship. And this is going to be the segue into our Elul topic of Hashem Hu Elokim. And what's this idea of I'll relate it later to Machiyot and the theme of Rosh Hashanah and the Tishrei holidays. But the showdown, which we talked about Elio and Mount Carmel, we didn't get to the Hashem Hu Elokim part. I saved it for today's share. I want to use that to try to understand what's this fight against idol worship and how we go from Elio and Mount Carmel to Yehu, to the revolt of Yehu in Emek Yisrael in the Jezreel Valley. So we're going to include our summer study of Melachim, which will introduce our Elul topic, and our fight against idol worship. And again, what's so bad about idol worship? Why is so much fighting it so? And why is there such a fight against it? And why was it so popular? Is it something theological or something behavioral that we have to talk about? So we have the famous showdown between Eliel and the Baal prophets on Mount Carmel, we're all familiar with. And then we'll trace those events to Elisha, the stories of Elisha, which lead to Yehu's revolt. And what's going to be in common, both Eliel and Har Carmel, after he does the miracle, there's a massive slaughter of the Baal prophets in Nachal Kishon. Basically, the people come and kill all the Baal prophets. And then we have the Elisha stories. And several decades later, when Yehu has a coup d'etat, when he takes over the country, it's a military general who wipes out Achav and Achav's kingdom and takes over the country. When he takes over the country, he does something very similar and wipes out all the Baal worshippers who were left over, and there were still many around. So both destroy the Baal prophets, but totally different circumstances. But it sort of is going to put closure on this whole time period, and we have to see why was it so popular and what are the Nevi'im fighting? Okay, so again, here's our time period. We've been circling this every single time, but just want to show you one more time. We're talking about the time of Eliel and Elisha. It begins with Achav's rise to power, Omri, and then Achav making the coalition with Yehoshaphat, bring Israel to great economic prosperity and unity together with Yehuda. Yehu's revolt is going to destroy everything, and things are going to fall apart after Yehu's revolt. We'll have to see why today. And things recover under Yoash and Yerovam ben Yoash, and that's already, we're not going to get to that in our study this summer of Sefer Melachim, but maybe another time we'll get to it. Now, let's just a quick review. We discussed last time different types of Nevi'im. Stage number one Nevi'im, I call it the miracle workers, to prove that God exists, that there's one God. That's the miracles of the 10 plagues coming out of Egypt and splitting the sea. You give the people that there is a God, that he exists. Once I believe he exists, then the question is, do I serve him? That's going to be the covenant in Har Sinai. So if I'm living in a time period where the very belief in God is in question, and people don't believe in this one God, or believe maybe it's one God, but maybe there's other gods as well, I need to prove the uniqueness of God and the existence of one God and not many gods. And we usually see the other gods are usually the nature gods. Once we believe in one God and we know we're God's people, then we need Nevi'im to explain how to serve God properly. That'll be the jobs of Nevi'im like Yeriel and Yishayael, Amos and Micha, what's called the later prophets, or big topic later in Sefer Melachim, but not at this point in Sefer Melachim. So we talked about, instead from Menachem, we had the Eliyahu stories at the end of Menachem Aleph, and once Achav becomes king, the focus of the book is more about Eliyahu than Achav. And then Menachem Bet, when Eliyahu leaves and Elisha takes over, the first 8 chapters, more about Elisha than the kings of Israel. And we try to explain why, and we began that explanation last week, we'll continue it this week. And all this leads to Yehu's revolt. Just a quick summary of the stories we did this last week. Eliyahu stops the rain because the key to Achav's success was his treaty with Lebanon, with Sidon, and his marriage to Izebel. The price he paid for that was Phoenician culture coming in, or idol worship culture of Baal and Asherah, which led to this new Middle East and this great financial success. And therefore, Baal worship was super popular. And then to fight that, Eliyahu tries to surgically get rid of Izebel, to keep Achav, and stops the rain. And then the question is Eliyahu the hero or the villain? That was the topic of class 2 weeks ago. Then we have the famous Mount Carmel showdown, which we'll talk about today a little more in detail. And the rain comes back, but it backfired and it didn't work. Okay? Izebel isn't impressed. She orders Eliyahu's death. Eliyahu runs away. And then what we ended up last week sure with is that God tells Eliyahu to do 3 things: to appoint Chazal the king of Aram, to appoint Yehu the king of Israel, and Elisha as his successor. Eliyahu only does this, only points Elisha. Elisha makes Chazal the king of Aram, and Elisha's student appoints Yehu the king of Israel. But when it's all over, everything Eliyahu tried to accomplish with the miracle, with stopping the rain, is going to be accomplished through a natural set of events, thanks to the new king of Aram, the new king of Israel, and the new Navi. And basically, we'll get rid of idol worship. We'll from Israel. We'll get rid of Izebel and Avodat Baal, but it'll happen in a very different way. Okay. There was a war between Hadad and Achav that we didn't have time to talk about, and Achav's sin with Kerem Navot, we talked about briefly last week. And then Achav dies in battle. That was the end of last week's share. And Yoshaphat, the king of Yehuda, isn't killed but he went to war with him. But he becomes successful, but Achav dies, and Achav's children take over. Achav's son, Ahaziel, dies, and Eliyahu sort of is angry with them. That's a whole different topic we didn't go to. That was Perek Aleph. We talked about last week Elisha succeeding Eliyahu as he leaves as the head prophet. The Navim and Beit El not accepting him, but the Navim and Yericho accepting him because they saw what was happening. And then here's what we didn't get up to. Elisha helps Israel for the war against Moab when Moab is fighting a coalition of Israel, Yehuda, and Edom together. We almost won the war, but we lose at the last minute. And then chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7 are all about Elisha miracles. Most of them about water. Even chapter 3, we'll see, will be about water. We're going to go over the water theme in a minute. But all of a sudden, in Sefer Menachem, we have a focus on Elisha and the miracles he does. I'll try to summarize them and try to understand why they're in the book, and how all these miracles is going to lead to Yehu's revolt and the goal of Eliyahu being fulfilled several decades later through a wholly different, totally different set of events. By basically, instead of stopping the rain and stopping water, by giving water and helping people through water. Okay, we're going to go over all these events later on, but just to review for those who studied Sefer Menachem, I think I have it. I'll come back in a minute, but it goes like this. So there was this big war in chapter 3, where the king of Israel, the king of Yehuda, from the house of Achav, go together with Edom, who was our ally at the time, go to war against Moab. Moab stopped paying taxes. That's called Mesha Melech Moab. We have there's a famous statue he made, or a monument he made. One day maybe we'll talk about it, called Sevet Mesha. It's a great archaeological find from way back. And then, but that's a war still about the Jewish people, but it's a war where he does a miracle with water. Elisha, there's a whole bunch of miracles in chapter 4 we'll talk about, in chapter 5 and chapter 6. Okay, we'll deal about all these miracles later on and show how they relate to water. Now, we're going to get to those in the middle. First, I want to go to Har Carmel and talk about it a little bit. What happened in Mount Carmel? Okay, now, I'm assuming you remember the story. There's a showdown between all the Nevi'ei Baal, 450, and Eliyahu and Har Carmel. And the Nevi'ei Baal, he gives him first chance, say all your prayers, do what you need to do. And they pray until afternoon, until Adar Lot Mincha. That's the question: is Adar Lot Mincha? Is that the Mincha? Are we relating this to the time period of the sacrifices in the temple in Jerusalem? That's what most Parshim want to say. Okay, but en kol ve'no ne ve'en kashev. Remember those words, right? No God, small g, answers the call of the Baal worshippers, despite all their screaming and yelling and praying. Nothing works. After their attempts don't work, Eliyahu tells the people, "Come to me now, come to my side." All the people now are impressed that Baal didn't work. And what does Eliyahu do? By Rapeh et Mizbach Hashem HaRus. What's that mean? There was once a altar to God on Mount Carmel that was destroyed. Now, who can tell me why they think God's altar on Har Carmel was destroyed? It was Yemit. Wait a second. I did something wrong here. I wanted to turn off the share screen. Okay. I want someone to suggest a reason why there would have been a Mizbeach for God on Har Carmel in the first place, and who would have destroyed it? Remember, it's got to be something that's legitimate, because Eliyahu wouldn't use it if it was an idol worship place. But on the other hand, it's destroyed. So why would God's altar on Har Carmel have been built in the first place? And why would it be destroyed? Anyone want to suggest? Guys are all quiet today. Even Rav Asher, no? Okay. No one in the chat. Oh, maybe there's a chat. Let me check the chat real fast. Chat. Oh, the source sheet's supposed to be on the website. Okay. What? Oh, Shelley's question about the Nevi'im of Asherah. I have the exact same question, because when the showdown begins, the Nevi'ei Baal and Asherah are all there. The 400 and the 450 are all there, but the showdown's only with Nevi'ei Baal, and when he kills the Nevi'im at the end, it's only the Baal prophets. What happened to the Asherah prophets? So either they're secondary, or it could be because Baal is a rain god. The showdown was with the rain god. So, they're the ones who lost, and they're the ones being punished. What happened to the Asherah god? I guess they got away. Okay. Asher, you going to say something?
That's with an aleph, Asherah. Those are trees. But that's not the God is with an ayin, Ishtarot.
Oh, that's Ashtoreth. That's something.
All the
I thought she was asking. I think she meant Asherah. Ashtoreth. Yeah, Ashtoreth. That's a different name of a god. The Shkar Lefecha Ashtoreth Sanecha. Those are cattle gods. No, not fertility gods. Those are gods of cattle. But Asherah,
they're fertility gods.
No, Asherah's fertility. Ashtoreth is fertility of animals, though.
Ishtar in Bavel is Venus. Venus, all the statues of Venus throughout ancient history, into Greco-Roman times, is always a female. It represents female fertility.
Okay, but it can be fertility also of animals. All I'm saying is you have in Parshat Et Chanan. Let me show you something. Is that Chanan or Ekev?
It's
Ekev, right?
It's the same word.
It's the fertility, but
is the same word as Ishtar, is the same word as Esther.
Okay,
exactly
but how about Asherah God? That's with an aleph, isn't it?
Those are the trees. They're not a god. They're planting trees next to their
which is another symbol, which could be a symbol, but they're called Nevi'ei Asherah. In the story, there are 400 Nevi'ei. There's 450 Nevi'ei Baal and I think that's what she's referring to, the Nevi'ei of Asherah. But I just think Baal is the main god here because it's a rain story, and therefore Baal is the main showdown with the rain god. Now back to thing. During the whole first temple period, we talked about this a lot. Even though they built the temple in Yerushalayim, Rak HaBamot Lo Saru. Remember? There were still Bamot, and Bamot was serving God, which means it makes sense that there's a Mizbeach for God on Har Carmel, which is serving Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, serving our God. Now, it's not good according to the Rambam, according to the end of Sefer Melachim, that Yerushalayim was the Menucha v'Nachala, and therefore all the places of worship were forbidden. But we know until the time of Chizkiel, Even the good kings, Rakabamot Lusaru, we talked about that a lot, didn't we? Therefore, it makes sense that there's the Mizbeach of Hashem, which is legitimate in the eyes of the from people up north. Understand? There's in Israel, there's people following God, the God of Israel, and people now following other gods, Asherah and Baal. Now, the most popular god now, thanks to Achav and Izebel, is Asherah and Baal, especially Baal. And therefore, and the Nevi Hashem, Izebel gets rid of. So I think the Mizbach Hashem was a legitimate in the eyes of, it might not have been legitimate, technically speaking, if I pass like say for Devarim, that Yerushalayim was a Menucha v'Nachala, but people up north didn't hold by that. And therefore, Avodat Hashem was Bamot. And Bamot were on all the high places. And Mount Carmel was a high place. So Mount Carmel had a Mizbeach for Hashem, our God, the right God. It was destroyed by the Baal worshippers, because that was their competition. But the Mizbeach Hashem wasn't from the time of the Shoftim. It might have been from the time of Shoftim. But the Mizbeach Hashem al-Rus wasn't destroyed by people who were loyal to Jerusalem and didn't want Mizbeach for Hashem on Har Carmel. It was destroyed by the Avdei Baal, I think, who Eliyahu was fighting. And what's Eliyahu doing? He's recovering Kvod Hashem. Therefore, Mizbeach Hashem that's earlier. Remember, at the time of Yerovam, there was still Mizbeach. They believed in the same God. They just didn't accept Yerushalayim as the proper place. So my claim is Mizbeach Hashem HaRus. It wasn't destroyed because it was in Yerushalayim, because Yerushalayim was built. It was destroyed because Baal was too popular. And Eliyahu was fixing it because he's bringing Avodat Hashem back to the northern kingdom. We'll get to this later on. We talk about what does Yehu do when he becomes king. Remember, Yehu gets rid of the Baal, but he keeps up Avodat Hashem of the Bamot. He follows the Chet Rabban still. Now, keep that in mind. Let's go back now to our source sheet. Where are we? Close up the chat and back to our source sheet. Where are we? Share screen and source sheet. Oh, wrong one. I need my source sheet. I'm never going to finish anything today. Open, share, and here we are. Okay. So, Vayarpet Mizbach Hashem Halrus. Okay. ויקח אליהו 12 אבנים, כמספר שבטי בני ישראל, אשר ידבר שם אליו לאמור, ישראל שמך. Who is Eliyahu copying here? That's got to be easy. What event in Jewish history is being copied here? Taking 12 stones corresponding to the 12 tribes of Israel. What's that parallel to?
Mitzbeach that was set up when they came across the river.
Yaakov.
Okay, so it's Yaakov has. That's awesome.
Yoshua. It's
Yaakov according to Rashi.
When they cross the river. It's Yoshua when they cross the river, Yarden.
Moshe at Sinai.
Okay, but the 12 stones Yoshua does cross the river, does he build a mizbech by them, or does he make the monument out of them?
He made the monument, but the mizbech was made later on in Har Gerizim and Har Eval when they came.
With what stones? That again, everyone's quoting the Midrashim. You're quoting the Midrash. When Yaakov had his dream, he took the Evan, remember? And Chazal say, and Rashi brings down, everyone was fighting he takes 12 stones and puts them around them. And they turn into one stone. Vaikach me'avnei was in plural. And then at the end it says, Vaikach et Evan, singular. So they say the 12 stones were fighting and they all got together and that became later the Matzeva, which is going to be the cornerstone of the Beit Elohim. That's
Rabbi
a beautiful
Rabbi Menachem, when they cross the river, when they cross the Jordan under the Kohanim, they put 12 stones.
That's right.
And later on, they took those stones and they
put them in Gilgal.
Yeah.
And they made a monument to remember what happened crossing the Jordan, not to rebuild the city. But I don't think But there's a much better example.
12. They schlepped another 12 to Har Gerizim, and there they made the Mizbeach.
It says that in Tanakh?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. We'll look at that in a minute. But way before then, there's a much better source.
Yes.
Look at the better source. You were there. Remember Shemot 20, chapter 24? Okay. Moshe comes down, tells the people Divrei Hashem after Mamad Har Sinai. Vayiktom Moshe kol Divrei Hashem. This is right after Mamad Har Sinai, right after at the end of Parsha Mishpatim. Moshe writes down, according to Rashi, this is at Har Sinai, even before Parsha Mishpatim. Okay. V'eshkem baboker, v'yivem mizbech tachat ahar, u'shtem esrei matzeva d'shtem esrei shiftei Yisrael. takes 12 little monuments corresponding to the 12 tribes of Israel. He sends Nari b'nei Israel, and they bring Olot and Shlamim. Okay. Moshe sprinkles, takes the blood, puts them in containers. Vayikach sefer habrit, vayikra b'ozneiam, v'yamru kol asher li b'Hashem naseh v'nishma. And then Moshe sprinkles the blood on the people. But 12 stones, right, gathered together to remind people of the commitment to be God's people. Whoa, that's the essence of, remember, what's the essence of Har Sinai? It's not receiving the Torah. The essence of Har Sinai is taking upon ourselves a commitment to be God's people, which is Hashem Hu Elokim. That's why that's why I'm building that up. Again, if Yeshua is going to take 12 stones, it's to remember this event. In other words, the core event of 12 stones is Mamad Har Sinai, which is the most important event, at least one of the most important events in Chumash, where the nation of Israel takes upon itself. Remember when they say Nasa v'Nishma and Moshe sprinkles the blood, what's called Dam HaBrit. Our commitment to serve God as His people, and as a people of 12 tribes together, that's Mamad Har Sinai, and I think that's the meaning of the 12 stones. And where else in the Eliyahu story do we have a connection to Har Sinai? Isn't there Aish and fire in Har Sinai? We'll have Aish in our story. But when this whole thing fails, what happens? Eliyahu runs away to Har Sinai with the 40 days and 40 nights, and everything comes back to Kod Mamadaka again. Never been Kolving. It's almost a reversal. But what I'm getting at, without going to the details, there's imagery here and parallels to Har Sinai. I'll try to suggest the reason without getting to explain every single detail, but there's definitely some connection between this showdown and Har Sinai, because the whole nation is gathered. And Eliyahu's goal is remember I said to you in the beginning, the miracles of coming out of Egypt of the 10 plagues, Nevi'im doing miracles, is to establish a belief in one God. And the next step is how to serve Him. So just like God does miracles coming out of Egypt, Hashem Hu Elokim, and then we go to Har Sinai.
I'm all right.
Wait, so let me do a quick
Okay.
a quick mute. How about that? Already, sorry about that. So just like in Har Sinai, everyone gets together and makes that commitment, and 12 stones represents the commitment of all 12 tribes to be God's people. I think that's the main imagery of Eliyahu and Har Carmel. Now let's go back to our source sheet and get to work. So again, he takes the 12 avanim, Kimispar Shifte B'nai Israel, okay, and then he takes the avanim and builds Mizbeach and B'Shem Hashem again. Then he surrounds it with water. We can skip all those details to prove that, but he's using water to surround the Mizbeach to prove that it's not to show how great the miracle is. And despite all the water, when the mincha goes up, and Chazal say, because based on what it said in the beginning, that must be way saying like it's time for the afternoon korban in Yerushalayim. Okay. Vayigash Eliyahu Navi v'yamar Hashem Elohei Abraham Yitzchak v'Yisrael. Now, isn't that? I'm not sure how many times you have that before that. No, we have that in prayer, but we have a similar nusach in Shemon Esrei. But here he turns to God, Hashem, the God of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yisrael. Remember, he wants to use Yisrael instead of Yaakov because, what do you call it? Because this 12 tribes of Bnei Yaakov goes back to Yisrael Yeshmecha. So he'll turn to the God of Yisrael. Okay? Hayom Yivada, listen carefully. Ki ata Elohim b'Yisrael v'ani avdecha u'bidvarcha asiti et kol dvarim ha'eleh. Remember the argument, who's the villain? Remember, who's the hero, who's the villain? Eliyahu was trying to tell the people, this wasn't my idea, this was God's idea, or at least God gave me the okay on this. Now, there's a big argument. Was it Eliyahu's idea and God agreed to it? Or was it Eliyahu was doing everything as God commanded him? So he says, I want everyone to know that Hashem is the God of Israel, and I'm His servant. And in your name, I did all these things. It's unclear, though, as Eliyahu was saying, everything I've done up until now, including stopping the rain, was what you told me to do, or I did it in the sake of your name. Or some Parshim say, what I'm doing now is in the name that God told him to do. But I think the simplest understanding is I'm your servant, and because I'm your servant, everything I'm doing is in your name. But that you've agreed to it, at least, even though it might have been Eliyahu's idea, but God has agreed to it. Okay. Then he says, Aneni Hashem Aneni ki beidu ha'am hazeh, ki ata Hashem Elohim. See why that's going to be important? Okay. What do the people need to know? God, answer me. But you have two anenis there. So the Parshim say there's two different prayers. One is to bring the rain. One is to accept the korban. The other is to bring the rain. V'yedu kol ha'am hazeh ki ata Hashem Elohim. That you're the God. You're the only God. And here's the big line. V'ata sebot et libam achronit. And you cause them to go astray. How'd you understand this? What's Eliyahu saying? Eliyahu is praying to God publicly and saying, answer me to accept my korban, have fire come down, eat my korban, and probably bring rain. And who's he blaming the sin on? Who's he blaming the sin on? What's he saying publicly? You ever pay attention to this pasuk? What God's saying? What Eliyahu was saying? He's blaming. Yeah, go and say. He's blaming God for what? For the people serving other gods. How could he do such a thing? Now, to prove that understanding, let me share with you the Gemara in Brachas that talks about it. It should be here. I think I saved it. Brachot here. In Brachot, Rabbi Lezer. This is Daf. What's it? Daf Lamed Chavtet. No, Lamed Aleph Lamed Bet. The greater got it this year, but mostly about Chana, but in the end of Eliyahu. Rabbi Lezer. Eliyahu itiach dvarim klapi mala. What did Eliyahu do? Eliyahu was sort of chutzpahdik. What's it say in English? That he was impertinent. I don't know what that means. Chutzpahdik is better in English. He was basically chutzpahdik against God, saying, you caused him to sin. And Rabbi Shmuel told him, and how you Akash Baruch Hu actually agreed to him, because he brings a pasuk from Micha. What do you call it? Vashah Harioti. In the Nevuah of Achrit HaYamim, here, what's he say? Difti Vasher Harioti. I'm not going to Micha, maybe I'll show you here. In Micha, the Achrit HaYamim, it'll be very similar to what Isaiah says about a messianic time period where we're doing God properly and other nations to come in and see us. Okay? All the nations will go in the name of their God, we'll follow the name of our God. And then God's going to bring back there'll be kibbutz galiot, okay? But yes, I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to gather together. Everyone was driven away. Vasher harioti. And God says, God's promising he'll bring back those who he's mean to. And basically God's taking responsibility of those who went away. But what I want to get at, real simple, is that why is Eliyahu saying it's your fault? Because why? If I'm following all the story till now, God allowed the rain. God allowed Achab to be successful. Achab brought in Izebel, and Izebel's policy worked. So God helped our economy. God was nice to Israel and gave us prosperity. But that prosperity wasn't linked to our good behavior. And Adarabba, even though we followed other gods, things were good. That's what Eliyahu tries to stop. So Eliyahu says, it's because you allowed Israel to prosper under Achav and Izebel, after he made the treaty with Izebel, you're to blame for the people going astray. And therefore, I'm going to show that the brains come to you, not from God. I think that fits. I think that understanding, that's the simplest understanding of why Eliyahu is saying, you're to blame for it. And therefore, that's why I stopped the rain, to show it wasn't because of Baal, but it was even though you did Baal worship, God was being nice to you. And you caused them, and now give them a break. Now give them rain, because now they'll realize you're the right God. And I can reach the same result. So I think that's my understanding of Tasibot Libam Achronit. It relates very nicely to the fact that there was prosperity till now. Now Eliyahu stopped the rain, and who's going to bring the rain back? Definitely not Baal. It'll be definitely our God. How does he have to prove that? Now he has to bring rain, and that's what's going to happen next. Let's go back to our story. This is a famous line. Vayarkon vayplu apneim v'yamru Hashem hu Elohim, Hashem hu Elohim. Okay, now, why they say it twice, usually it's for emphasis. I think we say it 7 times, I think, on Yom Kippur. But remember, it says, Anei Hashem v'yedu ha'am hazeh ki ata Hashem Elohim, v'ata sibot lebam. And what did the people answer? Hashem hu Elohim, Hashem hu Elohim. And right afterwards, Eliyahu says, now that I proved it, Eliyahu tells the people, go catch the Nevei Baal, right? Don't let anyone go away. And the people, not Eliyahu, the people join Eliyahu. They bring all the Nevei Baal down to Nachu Kishon. That's the valley below Haifa. And they're all killed. They're all executed in Nachu Kishon. Now, if the people agree to kill the prophets, it seems like it worked. It was Eliel now is on high. It seems like it's working. And unfortunately, we talked about last time, it lasted one day, and that was it. It doesn't impress Izebel. And even though they were all excited for one day, it didn't last. And that was a story later on with Izebel, like, saying you're dead tomorrow. Eliel sees no one. Remember, he saw no one's coming to his help, and he runs away, and he admits his failure, and he wants to resign. God accepts his resignation. He gives him 3 things to do. Now, notice that Eliel brings rain in this miraculous way, but stopping the rain caused a lot of damage, and therefore the people had a bit of anger. Elisha takes over. Okay? Almost everything Elisha does relates to water. Now, Eliyahu has everything with fire. So especially in chapter 1, remember, fire comes down and kills 50 and 50 each time. And we have fire on Har Carmel as well. But of Elisha miracles, when he crosses the Jordan after he picks up the cloak of Eliyahu, and Eliyahu goes to Shemaim, and the people in Yericho see the miracle when he crosses the Jordan. First, the miracle of crossing the Jordan with the water splitting. And then the water in Yericho is bitter. Remember? And he fixes the water in Yericho. So that's his first water miracle. Then the whole army, when they're in chapter 3, when the armies of Israel and Yehudah and Edom they go through the south to try to surprise Moab from the southern side, and then they get stuck in the desert, Midbar Yehudah, down in the Negev, and they're out of water. God does a miracle, thanks to Elisha, and there's a flash flood that brings water, rain in the desert, even though usually there's not water. A flash flood brings tons of water and solves the water problem, and the army doesn't die from thirst. And then after that miracle, that leads to their victory because they thought it looked like blood. And that's the story in chapter 3 you can read about. But again, it's a miracle relating to water. In chapter 4, he helps the widow of his fellow prophet. Remember? Now it's not oil, now it's not water, but it's oil. That's the Hanukkah miracle, hundreds of years before Hanukkah, where remember, she had one little container of oil, and she was destitute. Remember, her children couldn't pay off her debts, so she had to sell her sons into slavery to pay off her debts. And she complaining, she lost her husband because he was one of the prophets who Izebel killed, and therefore Elisha takes responsibility for her. He says, "What do you have in your house?" He says, "I have a little container of oil." It's Haftorah. We read on Shabbat. And then she says, "Go borrow kelim, and then fill up all your vessels with that little cask of oil." And that oil kept on pouring and pouring and pouring, just like the Hanukkah miracle. I think we talked about that once on our Hanukkah shiurim. But again, it's a miracle providing, being Mr. Nice Guy. But notice, they're all after chapter 3, where he saves the Israeli army. All the miracles starting in chapter 4 are about specific people, right? And this rarely ever happens in Tanakh, where a prophet comes and does a miracle for helping a single person. It could be it happened, but Tanakh never talks about it. Almost all the miracles, when they happen in Tanakh, or all the Nevi'im deal with Am Yisrael on a national level. A miracle coming, someone going around doing miracles for people, just giving them food and keeping them alive and sustaining them. And we'll see later on, even bringing up a little axe from the river. That's very, it's an anomaly in Tanakh. If you know your New Testament, which you shouldn't, but in case you do, that they take on. That's why their God is Elisha is the model that Christianity uses a lot with their God or their Son of God, and but we have to explain why it's an anomaly here in Tanakh. Okay, then he helps remember the barren Shunammite woman who gave him a place to stay. She was she didn't have a child, and then he gives her a child. And the child almost dies, and helps with this recovery. That's the famous story, also Haftarah. Then there's spoiled food. There's a set of prophets, all in chapter 4. The set of prophets, the food's no good, it's spoiled. What's called Mavet Basir. He fixes the food. And then there's some guy brings food and he gives food for everybody. And then he heals the Sarat of Naaman. So basically, all the stories in chapter 4, he's helping individual people with little mini miracles about sustenance and staying alive, not just water, but food and sustenance, but specific people. Then there was that axe. There was fellow prophets. There was an axe. They were cutting wood, and the axe they needed to cut the wood fell in the Jordan River. So he did a miracle when the axe came up. Then he provides intelligence to Israeli troops fighting Aram. He's telling where the ambushes are. So he's helping the nation, but in a very unheard of way that we don't have other Nevi'im doing, giving military information to the king. And then he predicts the victory over Aram and the siege of Shomron, and that miracle happens when the whole Shomron is about to fall apart. It's under siege, there's nothing to eat. And then the famous Haftarah from Parshat Nitzorah about the four lepers who can't be in the city, but they're starving because there's no food anywhere, and they go to the other camp, and they found the camp is abandoned because God did a miracle, and they all ran away. And then there was tons and tons of food because they left all their supplies there. And the last story of this unit is in chapter 8, where Gehazi, who was Elisha's servant, remember, who got Sarat later on, he's telling Elisha stories to the king of Israel. Now, from chapter 4 doesn't mention the king, but from chapter 5, in 6, 7, and 8, whenever the king of Israel is mentioned, he's never mentioned by name, he's just called Melech Yisrael. There's a whole complicated topic here, where chronologically, chapters 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, right, all happen later, after the rebellion of Yehu. Why that is too complicated for our last 5 minutes of this year. But what I'm going to talk about is that there's a unit of what's called Elisha stories that begins when Elisha takes over for Eliel in chapter 2. When Elisha leaves and when Eliel leaves and Elisha takes over. After that happens, the protagonist of the story is Elisha. He does miracles, primarily water, but also helping people with food and life, but helping individual people primarily, also the Jewish people, but primarily individuals. The last story is about Elisha's servant, Gehazi, telling Elisha's stories to the king of Israel. And in the middle of that story, as he's telling the story, some lady comes to complain about her land that was stolen, and that's the same lady who he brought his child back to life, and who he told her before him to leave because there'll be a famine. You can read the story later on in chapter 8. But we see a story about Gehazi telling stories about Elisha. So a lot of people want to say that's the closure of the unit that began in chapter 2 with Elisha taking over for Eliel, and ends it's called Megillat Elisha, ending here. A lot of commentators point out that Elisha does twice as many miracles as Eliel, which is good because he asked for double, but I don't think that has to be pshat. It's just interesting how that follows. And there's a lot of parallels between the miracles as well, but also sometimes contrasting parallels, because this is giving life and those are bringing punishment. But bringing the child back to life is a classic parallel, that Eliel did something very similar, bringing a child back to life. The mother thought she was dead. The child was dead. Now, why is Elisha unit here? I want to go back to the three things. Now I want to go back and show you what's going on at the book level, because that's the goal of our series. God told Eliel to do three things. Remember the three things? We have them. The three things were, they should be here. Or the three things here. To make Elisha a successor, to appoint Neo the king, and make Chazal the king of Aram. Right? We're going to go topic by topic. The last thing God told Eliel to do was make Elisha his successor, but that's the first thing that he does. Once he appointed Elisha his successor, that's in chapter 2. Remember, he appoints him as successor over here. The whole unit of Elisha becoming prophet begins in chapter 2 and ends in the beginning of chapter 8. Okay. The next story is still about Elisha, but Elisha making Hazael the king of Aram. That's the next thing God told Eliel to do. So Hashem told Eliel to make Elisha the Navi and Hazael the king of Aram. Eliel follow the order. I'm going to explain why it's out of order and why these units. So the first unit is Elisha becoming the prophet of Israel. That's till 8a. Got it? The next topic is Elisha, who is appointed by Eliel, making Hazael the king of Aram. Hazael comes from his illness and he makes him better. And at the end, he gives him this message that, go tell the king of Aram, Ben Hadad, sends Hazael to Elisha to find out if he's going to survive. God tells Elisha to tell Hazael to tell your boss, Ben Hadad, he's going to live, but really he's going to die. And he tells him sort of how to, in light of that, Hazael sort of suffocates Ben Hadad, and then he becomes king. Did he do it? Did Elisha tell him to do it, or did he understand from Elisha to do it? Whatever it is that happens. So the second thing that God told Eliel to do, making King Chazal king of Aram, Elisha does instead of Eliyahu. So I have my Elisha stories, and then Chazal becoming the king of Israel. And the next story is going to be about Yehu becoming king of Israel, doing the coup d'état. And that's not Elisha himself. That's Elisha sending his nar, one of his students, to go to the battlefield to call Yehu, the general, privately, and tell him he's going to be king of Israel and run away. And he instigates the military revolt. Now, in the 10 minutes I have left, I want to show you about what happens. What does Yehu do? Okay, we had the showdown in Mar Carmel. So as far as the order in Sefer Shoftim, strange order of Sefer Shoftim, we have the Elisha unit, and then Elisha appoints Chazal the king of Aram. That fulfills Eliyahu command number 2. Remember, Eliyahu command number 1, it's command number 3, but the first thing Eliyahu fulfills is the Elisha unit. Then he fulfills making Chazal the king of Aram. Okay? And then he's going to send his apprentice to instigate Yehu's revolt, which will lead Yehu becoming the king of Israel, which is Eliyahu command number 3. So I'm trying to show you is way back in the end of chapter 18. Go back to our little thing over here. At the end of chapter 18, or end of chapter 19, when Eliyahu runs away to Har Chorev, and God accepts his resignation, gives him 3 things to do. Those 3 things is going to be how God is going to fulfill what Eliyahu wanted to succeed with. In other words, Eliyahu's goal was to get rid of Yisrael, get rid of Avodat Baal, and bring the people back to Israel, and bring the people of Israel back to their God. Eliyahu tried doing it with Midat Adin, the hard way, stopping the rain, and the big showdown. And what happens? It didn't work. But in light of the 3 things that God tells Eliyahu to do, it does work. It just takes 20-some years, and it happens in a much slower fashion. Now, one thing I want to show you is that why was Eliyahu unsuccessful in getting the people, and why is Yehu successful in getting the people behind him? We're going to see when Yehu kills Izebel, the whole nation's behind him. There's the second Yehu begins his revolt, the whole army is backing him right away. Because Achav was popular, Izebel was popular because of financial success. I want to go back, I've been trying to show you since the beginning. Why did people like their government? Why did people like their king? If the economy is good, remember we talked about the high point on the thing? If the economy is good, you have security, life is good, the standard of living is good, you like your leaders. And if it's not broken, don't fix it. Therefore, Achav was popular and Izebel was popular because of our financial success. It's very hard to, to take that all away and have people still support you. And that's my first topic was Achav the villain or the hero. In the eyes of the people, he was the villain. Eliyahu tries to prove that he's the hero, but it lasts for a day and that's it. By the time Achav dies and his sons take over, his sons are not like their father, they're corrupt. There's Achaziel and then Yehoram. And then Yehoram goes to war against Aram, a pointless war, getting nowhere. And the only reason people are at war because the king wants the war. But and that's why the enemy around, we talked about last week, go for the king. As soon as you can get the king, everyone's going to abandon the battlefield because they really don't want to fight. And we're going to see that war continues later on with Yoram, the son of Achav. And it's so bad that the second one little prophet comes into the army base, where they're fighting in Aram, and tells one of the generals, God made you king. And then he comes out and asks, what did you say? And everyone agrees to it. Basically, Yehu is accepted right away as king by the people. Not so much they like Yehu so much, but they can't stand Achav's children. No, Achav was popular, his kids aren't popular. And now we're sick of Izebel now because we're fighting a war that no one wants to fight. They're getting nowhere with that war against Aram, against Syria. And we have a coup d'etat, not just by one individual general. The people, the army, is supporting the generals more than the king. And that leads to everything except for the coup d'etat. Now, if you know the story of maybe I should see it inside. I don't have it on the source sheet. In this coup d'etat, let me just get to my key point. In the coup d'etat, Yehu takes over. He kills not just the king of Israel, Yoram ben Achav. He kills the whole house of Achav. Achav's 70 sons, or his descendants, all of his followers, all the Ovdei Baal, everybody. Yehu wipes out everybody, the total bloodbath. And he's fulfilling God's command. Now, the problem is, by doing so, what's going to happen? All the prosperity that we gained is going to fall apart. Why? Not only does he kill the king of Israel, the king of Israel, Yehoram, was related to the king of Yehuda. Yochaz, the king of Yehuda, because Athaliah, remember, was Achav's daughter. And she's now the queen mother in Israel. So Yehu kills the whole royal family who was coming to visit Yoram, the king of Israel. So the ties of Yehuda are cut because he kills the Judean king. The ties with Lebanon and Sidon because he kills Izebel. He abandons the Syrian front when he does his coup d'etat, and Aram takes over at Ramoth Gilad. And everything that Achav accomplished falls apart. And that's why, if I go back to our sine wave from the very beginning, right? As soon as Yehu begins his revolt over here, what happens? Everything falls apart. Right? And we have a civil war that will lead to a terrible civil war with Yehuda and Israel. But everything that Achav did to bring prosperity falls apart. And that's why the people are going to be angry. First, they support Yehu, but they'll get angry at his descendants because everything's falling apart. But who are they going to blame? Well, they could blame Elisha or the Nevi'im. So what does Elisha have to prove? Elisha has to prove that what's called Sheyesh Navi B'Yisrael, that there's a Navi in Israel, and he needs, there's a lot of public sentiment against the Nevi'im, because when you're looking at what happened, who's to blame for this fall? Who's to blame for this negative derivative of Israel's economy falling apart? Our political status has gone down terribly after Yehu's revolt, which was instigated by the Nevi'im. Are we going to blame the Nevi'im or are we going to blame the leaders? So basically, Elisha has to build up his credibility, and therefore it could be that the reasons why Elisha has to do all these private miracles is because the credibility in Nevi'im is in question, and Elisha has to prove his credibility. That's why he helps the army fighting the battles. That's why he helps the intelligence when the army fighting Yoram. People need to know that the Navi likes the people. He's trying to support them, and if something's wrong, there's something else wrong with their behavior. Now, what happens? Elisha comes and takes over the country. We have to pick up one story, which we'll read it inside our regular Tanakh. There's going to be, when Yehu does his revolt, he's going to do the same thing to the Baal prophets, even worse than what Eliyahu did. Okay, so we did all the Elisha miracles. Here we are down here. I skipped the pasuk here. Yehu and Yoda ben Rechav, we'll see who he is in a minute, come to the Beit HaBaal, and they tell Ovdei Baal, make sure everyone in this room is a Baal worshiper. And he puts special cloaks on them. Basically, after his revolt, Yehu invites all the Baal worshippers to come to this big gathering, and everyone has to come. And we're going to make a big Baal celebration. He's sort of tricking them. And Yehu goes to make sure that only people in this building are Baal worshippers. And then he says, let's bring this big korban to the Baal, etc. And then when he finishes doing all this thing, Yehu tells all the people, go and kill all the Baal. They're all like sort of locked in this one building. And they go to this city, this place, this Beit HaBaal, and they basically kill all the Baal worshippers who came, destroyed all the matzevot, etc. And here's the big line: Vayashmed Yehu et Baal b'Yisrael. Yehu wiped out Baal worship from Israel, but what didn't he do? He continued the sins of Rabbi ben Nevat. Meaning what? He got rid of Baal worship, but we keep Dagalim in Beit El and Dan. And therefore, God tells Yehu, you did a good job, and therefore you're going to have 4 generations of kings over Israel ben Revim, all the way till Yerovam ben Yoash, and ben Yochaz ben Yehu. So he has 4 generations of kings and the last one, Yerovam ben Yoash, is tremendously successful. But Yehu lo shamar l'alecha b'torat Hashem el Yisrael b'chol levavo. He wasn't from enough. He wasn't religious enough. What did he do wrong? Chatot Yerovam ben Nevat. Okay. And then God begins to give them trouble. Now, if I go back one last time to my sine wave, what happens? Go back up to the front. Yehu's revolt leads to a fall, and Elisha is going to follow the fall and be there for the recovery. That's the chitzim he's sending for Aram that he tells Yoash. The recovery begins under Yoash and Yerovam ben Yoash, and things are going to get great again under Yerovam ben Yoash. Where are we? Yeah, under Yerovam ben Yoash, things will get great again over here. That'll be the final recovery. It'll take quite a while. Now, the question is going to be, what was Yehu supposed to do? Someone tell me, why did he have to follow the sins of Yerovam ben Yoash? When he became king, who did he kill? He got rid of the Baal worship for sure. Could Yehu go back and return and serve God in Jerusalem or not? Why should he, but why couldn't he?
Sure.
Who was king of Israel after Yehu's revolt? Yehu killed the king. And now, who took over the kingdom? Atalia.
Yehu is not from the line of David.
No, but he's the northern kingdom. Right? He got rid of Baal worship.
He's not from the
Why
line
can't he?
of David.
Why can't he unite the kingdom again with Yehuda?
He's not from the line of David, and therefore he can't take over in Yehuda.
For sure, but why can't they serve God in Yehuda? Why can't the Jews in the northern kingdom now go to Yerushalayim to serve God? I can still have the shared kingdom. The answer is simple. Here, let me have to read what happened. It's a part of Sefer Melachim that like nobody knows. Let me go to Sefer Melachim. Melachim 2 Kings. Here we are.
Atalia.
Yeah, Atalia. But how does Atalia become queen? What does Achab do? Achab has 70 sons. Let's go back to chapter 9. I'm sorry. Chapter 9. This part of Melachim is really complicated because the timing goes up. Here. Izebel gets killed. And then here. Okay, he kills Yoram, the king of Israel. Okay, here. Okay, they go to meet Yehu and Chagat Navot Israeli. And when Yoram sees Yehu, he says, "Are you here for peace?" And Yehu says, "You and no peace with you. You and your friends with Izebel." Okay. Yoram sees it. Say, what do you go? It's a coup d'état. He runs away. Okay? And he tells Achaziah, the king of Achaziah is the king of Yehuda. He says, "We've been tricked." Mirma Achaziah. Yehu shoots the arrow, right, and kills Yehoram. Okay, the arrow goes out through his side, and he falls over in his chariot, and he gets rid of him. And he says, "It's because you're being punished for the sin of Navot." Okay, Achaziah, the king of Yehuda, saw what's happening. He runs away on the way towards Yokneam, Mavigur Rivers, and he goes on the road to Megiddo on the way home, and he gets killed there. Okay, so he gets killed, and they bury him near David, and therefore, in the 11th year, of Yoram, the king of Achab, Achaziah was king of Yehuda. Okay, Yehu comes to Israel. Izebel heard, and then she puts on her makeup, whatever it is. We have time to tell the story of Izebel, but basically, Yehu has no problem finding volunteers to kill. To chuck Izebel out the window, and now no one comes to her support. Remember, 20 years ago, she had tremendous support, and she was more popular than Eliyahu. Now, everyone in the army hates her, and Yehu has no problem finding volunteers to go check her out the window. Okay, who's with me? Okay, and 2-3 start seeing come to him right away, and he says, "Check her out the window," and she goes out the window. Her blood goes down the side of the wall. And then says, go bury her. And sure enough, in the meantime, the dogs ate her up. There's nothing to bury. And he says that's exactly what God said was going to happen. So basically, we're fulfilling. Sent people on fulfilling God's promise to Eliyahu Tishbi. Okay, that Izebel is going to be punished in Chedek Israel because of the sin of Navot. Okay, so that's the end of Izebel and Achaziah, the king of Yehuda. Achav's 70 sons are killed by the people, right? What does Yehu do? Achav has 70 children, okay? And Yehu sends a letter to them and he says, listen, if I'll leave you guys alone if I find 70 decapitated heads outside the city tomorrow morning. So guess what happens? So they get the note, and then they go to the king of Israel. They take the king, what do you call it? They take the sons of the king, and they put all their heads in two big piles of skulls. Okay. And Yehu tells the people, I didn't do anything. You guys did it. I only killed the king. Who killed the 70? You people did it. He's showing the people are behind the revolt. Okay, but everyone should know that what God promised, His word's going to come true against the house of Achav. Okay? And Hashem did. Hashem asa asher diber biad avdo Eliyahu. Yehu is finishing what Eliyahu tried. Remember, I'm trying to show you the whole time. God is telling Eliyahu, I'm going to get it done my way. And therefore, God told Eliyahu to do three things: Elisha, Chazael, and Yehu. And by the time we get to Yehu, thanks to Elisha, everything's done. Now, listen carefully. A bloodbath. He wipes out everybody. Anyone associated with the royal family. And that's just the family members, all the bureaucrats, everyone in the government. Okay. And then he goes to Shomron. Okay. And then on his way doing his bloodbath, what does he find? He says, the royal family of Yehuda. He says, well, who are you guys? And they says, oh, we're the brothers of Achaziel, and we're coming to see how things are doing. They don't know what happened. They don't know about the coup d'etat. And he says, catch him alive, right? And they catch him, and they kill them also. What did Yehu do? He shechted, not just the Nevi'ei Baal, he shechted the whole royal family of Yehuda. Okay? And he's so happy about it. And then this guy, Yonatan Merichav, comes by. And he says, come on my chariot. You see, I'm going to do my kinah for God. He comes up later in the story. We'll see later on. It comes up later in Sefer Yirmiyahu, which we don't have time for today. We're way over time. And then she comes to Shomron. Over and over again. The point here, the Navi, is Eliyahu's prophecy finally came true. It just took 20-some years. Okay. Now, then he got rid of the Nevi'ei Baal, with this trick with them. And that now, what happened? Who becomes king in Atalia, the mother of Achaziel, the king of Judah, saw what happened, and she got rid of everyone else in the royal family. There's everyone not religious. Yehu got rid of everyone religious. Atalia got rid of, and the only remnant was left was Yoash, was a little baby, and Yosheva, the king's daughter, took her little brother and hid him. And he hid him in the temple together with Yoidah Kohen. That's the famous Haftarah from Parshat Shkalim. Now, but what I want to explain now, and we'll end with this. What's the situation now for the next 7 years in Yehuda? Atalia is in charge, and she's running the country, and she's full of idol worship. She's a disaster, Atalia. There's no way that Yehu can go back and unite the kingdom and serve God in Jerusalem. You have to keep Bamot. You understand? Because Jerusalem is not an option, because there's no one to work with there. So Chet Yerovam is understandable for Yehu. Remember I talked about the Mizbeach Hashem al Rus? There's Bamot all through the northern kingdom, through Yisrael. And what else are you going to do? We just prove Hashem Hu Elokim. People have to serve him. You need a Mizbeach. You need to daven. You can't go to Yehuda. You have to stay up north. And therefore, for the first 7 years, no one can have any complaints about Yehu not going to Yerushalayim to serve God there. He wasn't strong enough. He maybe didn't want to take over Yehuda. But until there's a revolt in Yehuda by Yehoiada and Yoash becomes king, for the first 7 years, there's nothing Yehu can do. But because of that, his whole economy falls apart. But Avodat Bamot continues. And because it started with Avodat Bamot, and it was legitimate in the beginning, because there was no alternative, once Yehuda recovers and Yoash becomes king, and he's a good thing to Yehuda, up north, they still don't, the northern kingdom, Yehu doesn't get along with Yehuda, and they don't go back to serving God. And that's why God gets angry with him. Not that angry. He has 4 generations of kings. And there's recovery under Yoash and Yerovam ben Yoash. Finally, Yerovam ben Yoash and Uzziah, the king of Judah, go work together, and they build another prosperous, united kingdom again. But what I'm trying to get at is that I can understand why Yehu keeps up the sins of Yerovam ben Nevat. Because for Yerovam ben Nevat, it was the wrong thing to do. But once it's established and once there's no good alternative in Yehuda, it makes sense what Yehu did in the beginning. That's why God is happy with Yehu. But Yehu should have done better. And by the end of his reign, he doesn't go back to Yehuda, and that's why God's angry with him. The things go bad, and then they recover under Yoash. That's a different topic, why things get better under Yoash, even though they don't deserve to be. That leads to the story of Yonah. Well, God has Rachmanis, has mercy on the people, will help him recover a little bit, and then he gets upset again later when they don't use the recovery properly. That's the only topic that takes into the topic of Yirmiyahu, of Yeshayahu and Amos and Micha, and the time period of Uzziah and Yerovam ben Yoash. So I went way too overtime today, but that's why I wanted to close up this topic of Sefer Melachim in the middle, and this idea of Hashem Elokim, the fight against idol worship is key. Because how are people going to relate to prosperity to the service of God? And as long as Avodat Bamot doesn't lead to haughtiness and cheating, as long as Avodat Bamot, if it's really Avodat Hashem, and it leads to good behavior, God's not going to won't be such complaint. It's when Avodat Bamot turns into idol worship, because all of a sudden our God becomes a rain God and a prosperity God. What's going to happen is, what I want to try and show you over the next couple of weeks when we get to Hashem Elokim, of what's this big theme of what it means, God's Malchuyot. I want to try and show is the problem of idol worship something theological or intellectual, or something behavioral. And it was how Avodah Zarah, when it's misunderstood, even sometimes Avodah Hashem misunderstood, can lead to Avodah Zarah. But Avodah Zarah is not, I don't think, is going to be something in the realm of intellect or theological, like believing in the oneness of God, but rather understanding what God wants from you and how you behave, and how your understanding of God affects your behavior and your prayer and the society that you build. And I'm going to take that to explain how that's going to explain Malchuyot. So I just needed this background to understand that the first stage of a Navi, there's one God, not many gods, and we have to serve him. Eliyahu's and then Elisha's miracles get that. Getting the people to serve God the proper way, it's going to take a long time. It's going to be a lot more difficult, and therefore believing in one God when things are going good. Got it? Basically, people follow the winners, and what leads to idol worship is when God lets us get away with bad behavior. You follow? That's, remember where Eliyahu says you caused them to sin because you didn't punish them early on. People follow God's prosperity. That's called the prosperity God, where if you're wealthy and things are going good, I must be doing the right thing. And sometimes God gives you prosperity even though you don't deserve it. Again, we'll start next week with that idea of what's called why God sometimes gives prosperity even though we don't deserve it, but how he expects us to reciprocate and realize it's from God. Well, sometimes God will have midat rachamim and not punish us, even though we might deserve punishment, in the hope that we'll appreciate the prosperity and return to God properly. And that'll be the job of later Nevi'im, to get them the right way. When that doesn't work, then God has to bring a punishment on. And we'll try to get this idea of what it means to serve God, and how the understanding of God has to lead to behavior, and not just something intellectual, but something behavioral. Okay, I'll stop here for questions. I mean, I'm way over time, but chat, any other questions? The altar Elisha healed was on the Israelites. Okay, so what Gershon is saying is that's if you hold by Rashi that Lo Tasun Kein L'Shem Elokechem is from the time that Jerusalem was chosen, but that was exactly the machloket up north, was to be reached Menucha v'Nachalaya. That's what I've been trying to explain all along. Therefore, the people hold it's not Menucha v'Nachalaya, and therefore it's legitimate up north. The altar Elisha healed foreshadowed the synagogue of Gush Katif. Oh, very good. Okay. Sometimes we have we build shuls and we destroy them ourselves, but that's a little more political, so I'll stay away from that. Too much politics going on. Already. Anyway, next week we'll start an Elul series, and I'm going to go back to Chumash, and I'm going to take the literal meaning of Hashem Elokim, not the way Eliyahu means it, but why is Chumash using two names for God in the first place? We'll deal with something real basic in Sefer Bereshit, and in light of that and that understanding, I want to show you how that'll lead to how Chumash is trying to explain how our understanding of God will lead to a proper service of God. But how Chumash uses two names for God to teach all the ideas I'm trying to talk about. Not just, I'm going to try and explain the logical reason why Chumash uses sometimes Shem Elokim and sometimes Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, especially in Bereshit, to build one of his key themes and messages that the Nevi'im later try to explain. But it'll take a couple weeks already. Okay, have a good week, everybody. And hopefully, you have a question, Asher?
Yeah, besides the three places that you emphasize, the three things you emphasize that God told Eliyahu to do after after the storm, earthquake, and so on. In the whole story of Eliyahu, is there any place where any other place where God tells Eliyahu to do something that in other words, that is not as a result of Eliyahu's initiative? It seems to me that everywhere Eliyahu is the one who takes the initiative and forces God's hand. And so there won't be a Chil Hashem. God is forced to do what Eliyahu wants him to do, as opposed to God directing Eliyahu to do.
You're saying Eliyahu tells God, you don't have a government without me, and therefore I can do whatever I want.
Well, no, not exactly. No,
I hear your point. I was using a bad analogy. No, I agree with you.
That's really my idea.
I think that's what he means when he's saying, he's claiming that it's not me, it's everything I'm doing is in the name of God, and God agrees with me. But you're right, God doesn't tell Eliyahu what to do.
He's saying it in public, and that forces God to respond by doing, because otherwise it would be a Chilul Hashem. He's saying in public in front of everybody. That verse, which I don't have in front of me, so I can't quote it. But so God has to do what Eliyahu has.
That's the essence of Har Carmel, isn't it? That's the essence of Har Carmel, that he's putting God on the spot. He's saying, if you don't answer my prayer here, God has to answer it, because otherwise it's a disaster.
Exactly.
So God, Eliyahu forces God to do the miracle, but I think the whole point is we pay a price for it because it didn't work. God had to give it, but the people weren't ready yet for the miracle. That's the problem. So the question of who to blame, first they blame Eliyahu, first they blame the Nevei Baal, and then later they blame Eliyahu. But my point is, the people go by prosperity. And we don't get rid of Baal worshippers, we don't get rid of Izebel until things go bad. Until Achav's kids run the country down the drain, ruining the economy and going to war they don't need to fight, then there's a public revolt against the king. But when things are going good, everyone likes the king.
It's like there's no God, no atheists in a foxhole.
Yeah. And the big question, again, that's going to be our topic in Elul, is that how our understanding of God affects our behavior. How this understanding of one God, is it something, again, intellectual, behavioral? I want to try and build that from its foundation next week. Okay. Everyone have a good week, and we'll be in next week. We'll start and hopefully have a Chodesh Tov, and like we said in Birchat HaChodesh, will be Sorot Tovot.
Rabbi Leibtag, somewhere along the line, if you could explain along this line, it says all the time that you have to bring sacrifices to the place where God will show, which God will determine. Nowhere do we learn where God determined. David determined that it was going to be, Jerusalem, and then sort of God agreed. But again, it's the same same problem again. We never have a place that Tanakh says God chose that place, and therefore David, or therefore Shlomo built.
We read this week. The Shichnoti Dushuva Tashama. No, it's Hamakom Hashivchar Hashem.
Yeah.
The Shichnoti Dushuv. Those God can nominate the place, but we have to choose it. The Shichnoti,
but he never nominated it. That's my problem.
Sure he did.
Where?
When by answering prayer. No, I gave a shirway back on it. Is that when God answers prayer, that's how he nominates a place. We have to want to build a temple there, but you only build a temple in a place where God shows that he answers prayer. God answered Yaakov's prayer, remember, on the Har, and Yaakov says, "I'm going to build a Beit Elohim there." But the decision to build a Beit Elohim has to come from the people, because if the people don't want the Beit Elohim, it won't happen. But they have to pick a place where God has shown his presence. That's why the Mishkan, the Shekhinah has to return for the Mishkan to become functional. And that's why on Yom HaShmini, Moshe and Aaron have to daven. And the Shekhinah returns, and then God accepts the Korban. But I'm trying to show you how Makom HaShivchar Hashem doesn't mean the place that God will choose to build a temple. The God will place will choose to answer prayer. And then we have to want to build a temple there. If you don't want to build a temple, there's no point in building a temple. Because the temple is something we need, not God. God doesn't need a temple. We need a temple to remember Har Sinai. Remember, the whole goal of the temple, your question is going to lead right to our key topic of Malchuyot, where the goal of the temple is not God working for you, it's you working for God. The goal of the temple is having a place to remember your commitment at Har Sinai. And that's why Elio is making the 12 stones. Elio wants to turn Har Carmel into a Har Sinai event. And the people are fine with God if he brings them rain, but they're not ready to make the commitment to be God's people. And it's going to be the core of idol worship. And to this day, where you if the bind to religion, God working for me, you'll get a lot of people, but you won't get good behavior. You need a place of worship, but you're worshiping God to remember that he blesses you based on your behavior, not based on your sacrifices. And your question is going to lead exactly to what I want to get across in Elul's mind. I want to prove it from inside. It's a totally different understanding of religion, but it's what Chumash is. I think Chumash is screaming it, but people don't hear it. But we'll talk about that right next week.
Thank you.
Okay.